When I came home to find another woman's silk robe hanging in my closet and her expensive perfume bottles lined up on my vanity, I knew my marriage was over. But when I discovered she'd actually moved into my house while I was visiting my sick grandmother, I realized this wasn't just betrayal, this was war. What they didn't know was that I'd already found her apartment keys, and I was about to teach them both a lesson about underestimating the wrong woman. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I should have known something was wrong the moment Ryan started working late every night. After 8 years of marriage, you develop an instinct for these things. But I pushed those nagging feelings aside, telling myself I was being paranoid. Ryan Hayes had always been ambitious about his sales career, and the promotion to regional manager meant longer hours and more travel. I convinced myself that his distant behavior was just stress from the new responsibilities. Our life in Austin had always felt stable, predictable even. We'd bought our dream house in Cedar Park 3 years earlier, a beautiful 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch and mature oak trees that provided perfect shade during those brutal Texas summers. I worked as a marketing specialist for a growing tech company downtown, while Ryan managed sales territories across the Southwest. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable, and I thought we were happy. The first real warning sign came on a Tuesday evening in March. I'd gotten home early from work, hoping to surprise Ryan with his favorite dinner before he left for another business trip to Denver. His suitcase was already packed and sitting by the front door, but what caught my attention was the unfamiliar receipt sticking out of his laptop bag. Without really thinking about it, I pulled it out to throw it away, assuming it was just another restaurant expense he'd need to submit for reimbursement. Victoria's Secret. $87. The date was from the previous week, during his last trip to Colorado. My hands started trembling as I stared at the receipt, trying to process what I was seeing. Ryan had never bought me lingerie, claiming he wasn't good at picking out that sort of thing. In 8 years of marriage, he'd never once stepped foot in a Victoria's Secret store. When he walked through the door 20 minutes later, wheeling his carry-on behind him, I was still standing in the kitchen holding that receipt. His expression shifted the moment he saw me, a flicker of panic crossing his features before he forced a smile. "Hey honey, ready for another exciting week in Denver," he said, moving to kiss my cheek, but I stepped back. "What's this?" I held up the receipt, watching his face carefully. "What's what?" He squinted at the paper, though I could tell he knew exactly what it was. "Oh, that. Just picked up something for my sister's birthday. You know how she's always talking about wanting nice things but never buying them for herself." The lie came so smoothly, so effortlessly, that it actually impressed me in a sick way. His sister lived in Phoenix, not Denver. Her birthday wasn't until September, and she was a devoted Christian who would never wear the type of delicate lace items detailed on that receipt. "Since when do you shop for Linda's birthday 6 months early?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the growing pit in my stomach. "I saw something I thought she'd like and grabbed it while I had the chance," he replied, already moving toward his suitcase. "You know how forgetful I am about these things. Better to buy it early than forget entirely." The explanation was reasonable enough to plant doubt in my mind, and I found myself almost wanting to believe it. But the way he avoided my eyes while he spoke, the slight tremor in his voice, and the fact that he'd never been spontaneous about gift-giving in his entire life all told a different story. That night, after he left for the airport, I found myself going through his things with a methodical precision that scared me. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just following an instinct that something was terribly wrong. In the back of his desk drawer, underneath old warranties and instruction manuals, I found a business card for a real estate agency in Denver. Stephanie Morgan, licensed realtor, with a professional headshot of a stunning brunette with perfect teeth and predatory eyes. Why would Ryan need a realtor in Denver when his company always arranged his accommodations? I turned the card over and found handwritten digits on the back, not a phone number, but what looked like an apartment number. I spent the next 3 days in a strange limbo, going through the motions of my normal routine while my mind raced with possibilities. Maybe she was helping him find investment properties. Maybe his company was considering relocating him and he hadn't told me yet. Maybe I was losing my mind and seeing conspiracies where none existed. But deep down I knew with the horrible certainty that comes from loving someone long enough to recognize when they're lying to you. The confirmation came in the worst possible way. My grandmother called Thursday evening, sobbing into the phone that Grandpa Joe had taken a turn for the worse and wasn't expected to make it through the weekend. Without hesitation, I threw clothes into a bag and drove through the night to Shreveport, Louisiana, where my grandparents had lived for 40 years. I called Ryan's hotel in Denver to let him know what was happening, but the front desk told me no one by that name was registered. I spent 4 days at my grandmother's bedside, holding her hand while she grieved for the man she'd loved for 53 years. Grandpa Joe passed away peacefully on Sunday morning, and I stayed through Tuesday to help with arrangements and make sure Grandma would be okay. It was the longest I'd been away from home since Ryan and I got married, and I was emotionally drained by the time I pulled into our driveway Wednesday afternoon. The first thing I noticed was the unfamiliar silver BMW parked in Ryan's usual spot. The second thing I noticed was that someone had been watering my flower beds, which I definitely hadn't asked anyone to do. My hands shook as I unlocked the front door, every instinct screaming that something was very, very wrong. The smell hit me first, a heavy, cloying perfume that definitely wasn't mine, mixed with the lingering scent of expensive takeout and unfamiliar shampoo. Someone had been living in my house. Someone had been sleeping in my bed, cooking in my kitchen, showering in my bathroom. The evidence was everywhere once I started looking. Coffee pods I'd never bought, a half-empty bottle of wine I didn't recognize sitting on the counter, dishes in the dishwasher that didn't match our normal pattern. The bathroom counter was cluttered with high-end cosmetics and skincare products that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. But it was the closet that finally broke me. My clothes had been pushed to one side to make room for an entire wardrobe of designer pieces. Silk blouses, cashmere sweaters and cocktail dresses with tags from stores I couldn't afford hung alongside my simple work clothes like they belonged there. On my side of the dresser, expensive lingerie sets were folded neatly in the drawers where I kept my cotton pajamas and sensible undergarments. This wasn't an affair, this was a complete replacement of my life, systematically executed while I was grieving with my family. Ryan hadn't just cheated on me, he'd moved his mistress into our home, into our bed, into my space. The violation was so complete, so calculated, that I actually felt dizzy. I sank onto the bed we'd shared for 3 years, surrounded by evidence of another woman's presence, and tried to process what was happening. They'd obviously been planning this for months. The business trips to Denver, the lies about hotel reservations, the gradual emotional distance I'd noticed but ignored. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake made in passion. This was a deliberate decision to erase me from my own life. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Hope everything's okay with Grandma. Miss you. Home Friday night as planned." The casual normalcy of the message, sent while another woman's belongings filled our bedroom, pushed me over the edge. He was planning to come home and continue this charade, probably expecting me to be none the wiser. Maybe he thought I'd never notice the subtle changes, or maybe he simply didn't care anymore if I found out. Either way, the disrespect was staggering. I stood up slowly, wiping away tears I didn't remember shedding, and walked to the kitchen where I'd left that business card 4 days earlier. Stephanie Morgan, licensed realtor. The woman who'd invaded my home, slept in my bed, and apparently thought she could just move into my life without consequences. I pulled out my laptop and started researching everything I could find about Miss Stephanie Morgan. Her real estate website featured the same predatory smile from the business card, along with glowing testimonials about her aggressive negotiation tactics and commitment to getting her clients exactly what they wanted. Her social media profiles showed a lifestyle of expensive restaurants, designer shopping trips, and luxury vacations, all funded by what appeared to be a very successful career, selling high-end properties in Denver's booming market. More importantly, her Instagram posts were tagged with locations, that included a trendy apartment complex in downtown Denver. Cross-referencing that with public records and rental listings, I found exactly what I was looking for. Stephanie Morgan, Unit 412 at the Meridian Luxury Apartments, a building that charged more per month in rent than Ryan and I spent on our mortgage. She'd been careless with her social media presence, posting photos that clearly showed her apartment number on the door, and even a few shots that included her mail being delivered with her full address visible. For someone who made a living being detail-oriented, she'd left a remarkably clear trail of breadcrumbs for anyone motivated enough to follow them. As I sat in my violated kitchen, scrolling through photos of the woman who'd taken over my life, a plan began forming in my mind. It wasn't rational, and it certainly wasn't legal, but it felt like justice. If Stephanie Morgan thought she could just move into my house and claim my husband, she was about to learn that two could play that game. The spare key I'd found hidden in her makeup bag was still sitting on my bathroom counter, attached to a keychain with 412 embossed in gold lettering. She'd been confident enough in her position to leave it behind, probably planning to use it as needed. What she didn't realize was that she'd just handed me the tools for the perfect revenge. I spent the rest of Wednesday photographing everything she'd left behind, documenting the complete invasion of my space with methodical precision. The expensive clothes, the cosmetics, the lingerie, the personal items that proved she'd been living here for days, possibly weeks, evidence that would be useful later, though I wasn't yet sure exactly how. Thursday morning, I called in sick to work and booked a flight to Denver. If Stephanie Morgan wanted to play house in my home, she was welcome to it, but she was going to discover that I could be just as ruthless as she was, and I had the advantage of being legitimately angry instead of merely greedy. The plane touched down at Denver International Airport at 2:47 p.m., and I took a taxi straight to the Meridian Luxury Apartments. The building was exactly as pretentious as I'd expected from the photos, all glass and steel with a doorman who looked like he'd stepped out of a men's fashion magazine. I walked through the lobby like I belonged there, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and stood outside apartment 412 for a full 5 minutes, key in hand. This was my point of no return. Once I opened that door, I'd be committing to a course of action that would change everything. But as I thought about coming home to find another woman's perfume in my bathroom, and her lingerie in my drawers, the decision became easy. The key turned smoothly in the lock and I stepped into Stephanie Morgan's life with the same casual confidence she'd shown when she moved into mine. Her apartment was everything I'd expected from her social media posts: expensive, impeccably decorated, and completely soulless. It looked like a furniture showroom rather than a place where someone actually lived, all neutral colors, and designer pieces arranged for maximum visual impact. What struck me most was how temporary it all felt. There were no family photos, no personal mementos, no signs of deep roots or meaningful connections, just expensive things arranged in expensive ways. The lifestyle of someone who measured worth in dollars rather than relationship. It made sense that someone like this would see my marriage as just another acquisition, another upgrade to be pursued and obtained. I set my bag down in the entryway and pulled out my phone to send Ryan a text. Something's come up with work. Going to be staying in Denver for a few days to handle a client emergency. Don't wait up. Within minutes, he responded. That's crazy. I'm actually in Denver too. Maybe we can grab dinner tomorrow night. The audacity was breathtaking. He was planning to have dinner with me, while his mistress's belongings were scattered throughout our bedroom at home. The depth of deception required for that level of compartmentalization was almost impressive in its sociopathic efficiency. Sounds perfect, I texted back. Can't wait to catch up. I spent the rest of Thursday exploring Stephanie's apartment, learning everything I could about the woman who'd tried to steal my life. Her medicine cabinet revealed a collection of prescription anxiety medications and sleeping pills that suggested her confident exterior might be hiding some serious psychological issue. Her credit card statements, carelessly left scattered across her desk, showed she was living far beyond her means despite her apparent success. Most telling of all was the drawer full of love letters and cards from various men, dating back several years. Stephanie Morgan wasn't just after my husband, she was a professional other woman, someone who made a hobby of pursuing married men and breaking up established relationships. Ryan wasn't special to her, he was just her current project. That night, I ordered dinner from the most expensive restaurant in the building's delivery radius, and charged it to the credit card I'd found in her kitchen drawer. If she wanted to play games with other people's lives, she could start by paying for my meal. I opened a bottle of wine from her impressive collection, and settled in for the evening, planning exactly how I was going to destroy her life the same way she'd tried to destroy mine. The beautiful thing about being methodical is that you don't make mistakes when you're angry. You make strategic decisions that maximize impact while minimizing consequences. And I had all night to plan the perfect strategy for showing Stephanie Morgan exactly what happened when she messed with the wrong woman. By Friday morning, I was ready to begin the systematic dismantling of her carefully constructed life. But first, I had a dinner date with my cheating husband, and I intended to make it a meal he'd never forget. Friday evening arrived with the kind of crisp mountain air that makes Denver feel like a postcard, but I barely noticed the scenery as I prepared for what would either be the most satisfying dinner of my life, or complete disaster. I'd spent the day systematically going through Stephanie's apartment, learning her routines, her weaknesses, and most importantly, her schedule. The woman was obsessively organized, keeping detailed calendars both digital and physical that revealed she'd been planning this takeover of my life for months. Her laptop, carelessly left open and unlocked, contained email chains with Ryan dating back to December. Not just flirtatious messages, but detailed discussions about their future together, plans to sell our house once the divorce was finalized, and strategies for maximizing Ryan's assets during the settlement. They'd been calculating every angle, treating the destruction of my marriage like a business transaction with projected profit margins. What made it worse was reading Ryan's messages in his own words, seeing how easily he'd compartmentalized his feelings. He wrote to Stephanie about being tired of my lack of ambition, and how I'd become comfortable with mediocrity in a way that held him back from achieving his full potential. The man who'd promised to love me through better or worse had apparently decided I was the worst part of his life equation, but it was Stephanie's responses that truly revealed her character. She'd encouraged every criticism, feeding his dissatisfaction and positioning herself as the upgrade he deserved. Her messages were masterfully manipulative, always agreeing with his complaints about me while subtly suggesting she could provide whatever I was supposedly lacking. She was a professional at making men feel like they were settling for less than they deserved. The dinner reservation was at Mercantile, one of Denver's most exclusive restaurants, the kind of place that required bookings weeks in advance. Ryan had somehow managed to secure a table for two, probably using Stephanie's connections, since her real estate success apparently came with certain social privileges. I wondered if he'd planned to take me there or if this was meant to be another secret dinner with his mistress before I'd unexpectedly arrived in town. I spent an hour getting ready in Stephanie's bathroom, using her expensive cosmetics and styling my hair with her professional-grade tool. If I was going to confront my cheating husband, I wanted to look absolutely devastating while doing it. Her closet provided the perfect outfit, a black wrap dress that fit me perfectly despite our different body types, paired with shoes that cost more than my monthly car payment. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was getting ready for dinner with my husband, using another woman's belongings in another woman's apartment, while she was presumably still making herself comfortable in my house. The situation had moved so far beyond normal marital problems that it felt almost surreal, like I was living in someone else's drama rather than my own life. Ryan was already seated when I arrived at the restaurant, checking his phone with the distracted air of someone managing multiple conversations simultaneously. He looked up as the hostess led me to the table, and I watched his expression shift through several emotions before settling on forced enthusiasm. He stood to kiss my cheek and I caught a whiff of unfamiliar cologne, another small detail that confirmed how thoroughly he'd transformed himself for his new relationship. "Victoria, you look incredible," he said, and I could hear the genuine surprise in his voice. "That dress is stunning. Is it new?" "Something I picked up today," I replied smoothly, taking my seat and accepting the wine menu from our server. "You know how I like to shop when I'm stressed about work." We ordered drinks and made small talk about the restaurant, the city, anything except the obvious questions hanging between us. Ryan seemed nervous, constantly glancing at his phone and making comments about how crazy it was that we both ended up in Denver at the same time. His performance was almost convincing. If you didn't know, he was lying about literally everything. "So tell me about this client emergency," he said after our appetizers arrived. "Must be pretty serious to bring you all the way out here on such short notice." I took a sip of wine, buying myself time to craft the perfect response. "Actually, Ryan, I think we should talk about why you're really here, and more importantly, why your girlfriend's belongings are currently spread throughout our bedroom at home." The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might actually faint. His fork clattered against his plate, and he looked around the restaurant as if checking for escape routes. When he finally met my eyes again, I saw something I'd never seen before: genuine fear. "Victoria, I don't know what you think you know, but I know that Stephanie Morgan has been living in our house while I was dealing with my grandfather's death," I interrupted, keeping my voice level despite the fury building in my chest. "I know that you've been lying about your business trips for months. I know that you've been planning to divorce me while pretending everything was fine, and I know exactly what kind of person you really are." Ryan's mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound. Finally he managed to whisper, "How did you find out? Does it matter? The question is what happens next." I leaned back in my chair, studying his face as he processed the fact that his careful deception had crumbled. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice that another woman had moved into my house, or were you just hoping I'd be too devastated to fight back?" "It's not what you think," he said weakly, the standard response of every cheater who'd been caught. "Stephanie and we didn't plan for this to happen. It just evolved naturally, and we realized we had something special." The casual way he said her name, like I should already be familiar with her as a legitimate part of his life, made my stomach turn. "How long, Ryan? How long have you been planning to replace me?" "It's not about replacing anyone. We just grew apart, Victoria. You have to admit that. We haven't been happy for a long time, and when I met someone who understood my goals, who supported my ambitions, when you met someone who flattered your ego and told you what you wanted to hear, I corrected. Someone who saw a successful man with assets worth acquiring and positioned herself accordingly." Ryan's defensive expression suggested I'd hit closer to the truth than he wanted to admit. "Stephanie isn't like that. She's successful in her own right. She doesn't need anything from me." "Really? Then why is she living in my house instead of her own apartment? Why are you paying for her expensive lifestyle while she's behind on her rent?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken of Stephanie's overdue bills and credit card statements. "Your girlfriend is broke, Ryan. She's been using you to maintain a lifestyle she can't afford." His face went through another series of expressions as he processed this information. Clearly Stephanie had been presenting herself as more financially stable than she actually was. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The realization that he might have been played just as thoroughly as I had been was obviously a new concept. "Even if that's true," he said slowly, "it doesn't change how I feel about her, or how I feel about us. We haven't been right together for years, Victoria. Surely you can see that. What I can see is that instead of talking to me about problems in our marriage, you decided to solve them by finding someone else. Instead of working on our relationship, you invested your energy in building a new one. And instead of being honest about what you wanted, you made me feel crazy for noticing that something was wrong. The truth of it hung between us like a physical presence." Ryan had the grace to look ashamed, but it was too little too late. The damage was already done, and we both knew it. "So what happens now?" he asked quietly. "What do you want from me?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since I'd first walked into my violated home. What did I want? An apology would be meaningless. Explanations would just be more lies. Promises to end things with Stephanie would be empty gestures from someone who'd already proven his word was worthless. "I want you to understand that actions have consequences," I said finally. I want you to learn that you can't just take what you want from people without paying a price. And I want you to experience what it feels like to have your life disrupted by someone else's choices. What does that mean? I smiled. And I could see from his expression that it wasn't a reassuring sight. It means that while you've been playing house with your girlfriend in my home, I've been getting very comfortable in hers. Stephanie's apartment is lovely, by the way. Great view, excellent security, and surprisingly affordable when you're not the one paying rent. Ryan's eyes widened as the implications sank in. You can't do that. You can't just break into someone's home. Funny, I said the same thing when I found her toothbrush in my bathroom and her lingerie in my dresser. But apparently property rights are more fluid than I thought. I pulled Stephanie's spare key from my purse and placed it on the table between us. She was careless enough to leave this behind. I'm just returning the favor of making myself at home in someone else's space. Victoria, this is insane. You're talking about committing crimes. Am I just following the new rules that you and Stephanie established when you decided my consent wasn't required for major life decisions? I leaned forward, enjoying the panic in his eyes. Here's what's going to happen, Ryan. You're going to go back to our house and pack up every single item that belongs to your girlfriend. Then you're going to explain to her that her little vacation in my home is over. And if I don't, then I'll make sure everyone in Stephanie's professional network knows exactly what kind of person she really is. Her real estate license requires maintaining certain ethical standards, doesn't it? I wonder how her clients would feel knowing she makes a hobby of destroying marriages and stealing other women's husbands. The threat hit its mark. Ryan's face went pale again as he realized I'd done my homework on his girlfriend's vulnerability. Her career was built on reputation and trust, and a scandal involving adultery and home invasion would destroy everything she'd worked to build. You're not this person, Victoria. You don't do things like this. You're right. I didn't used to be this person. But you and your girlfriend taught me that being nice and trusting people gets you taken advantage of. So I'm trying out this new approach where I protect myself instead of waiting for other people to do the right thing. Our dinner had grown cold while we talked, but neither of us was interested in eating anymore. The conversation had moved far beyond social pleasantries into territory that would define the rest of our relationship, however long that might last. What about us? Ryan asked quietly. Is there any chance we can work through this? It was the question I'd been dreading because it forced me to confront the hardest truth of all. Despite everything he'd done, part of me still loved the man I'd married 8 years ago. The problem was that person might not exist anymore, if he ever had. The Ryan sitting across from me was a stranger who'd been wearing my husband's face while systematically dismantling our life together. I don't know, I admitted. Right now, I can't see past the betrayal. You didn't just cheat on me, Ryan. You moved another woman into our home while I was grieving my grandfather. You planned a future with her while lying to my face every day. You made me feel like I was losing my mind when I noticed you pulling away, instead of just being honest about what was happening. I was trying to spare your feelings. No, you were trying to spare yourself the discomfort of a difficult conversation. You were protecting your own interests while leaving me completely in the dark about what was happening to my own life. Ryan stared down at his untouched dinner, finally understanding that his careful justifications weren't going to work. There was no way to frame his behavior that didn't make him look selfish and cruel. So what happens next? He asked again. Next, you're going to call Stephanie and tell her to pack up her things and get out of my house. Tonight, you're going to explain that her little fantasy of playing house is over, and if she's smart, she'll apologize and disappear from our lives completely. And then we'll see. Maybe we can try counseling. Maybe we can work on rebuilding trust. Or maybe we'll discover that we're too broken to fix. I gathered my purse and stood up from the table. But those conversations happen after you clean up the mess you made, not before. Where are you going? Back to Stephanie's apartment. I've got some calls to make and some research to finish. I dropped enough cash on the table to cover my portion of the bill. Oh, and Ryan, you might want to check your credit card statements. Your girlfriend's been using them to maintain her lifestyle. Just thought you should know what kind of partnership you've invested in. I walked away from the table without looking back, leaving Ryan to process the destruction of his carefully planned deception. The hostess asked if everything was all right as I passed, and I gave her my brightest smile. "Everything's perfect," I told her. "Just had to clear up some confusion about who belongs where." The walk back to Stephanie's building gave me time to think about what I'd just done. In the space of one dinner, I'd destroyed Ryan's comfortable lies and forced him to confront the reality of his choices. But more importantly, I'd discovered something about myself. I was much stronger than I'd ever realized, and I was tired of being the victim in someone else's story. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Please don't do anything crazy. Let's talk about this rationally." I responded, "I am being rational. For the first time in months, I'm thinking clearly about what I deserve and what I'm willing to accept. You should try it." Back in Stephanie's apartment, I opened her laptop again and began composing emails to her professional contacts, not to destroy her career immediately, but to plant seeds of doubt about her character and judgment. A few carefully worded questions about her recent behavior, some expressions of concern about her involvement with married clients, subtle suggestions that her professional ethics might be worth examining. I also contacted a locksmith to schedule an appointment for early Saturday morning. If Stephanie wanted to play games with keys and access, she was about to learn that I could play that game much better than she could. By the time I was finished with her apartment, she'd need more than Ryan's credit cards to get her life back on track. The beautiful thing about systematic destruction is that it doesn't require anger or emotion, just careful planning and attention to detail. And I had all night to plan exactly how I was going to dismantle Stephanie Morgan's carefully constructed life, piece by professional piece. She'd made the mistake of thinking I was weak, simply because I'd been trusting. She was about to learn the difference between kindness and stupidity, and it was going to be an expensive education. Saturday morning arrived with the sharp clarity that only comes after making irreversible decisions. I woke up in Stephanie Morgan's king-sized bed, surrounded by Egyptian cotton sheets that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and felt surprisingly calm for someone who'd spent the previous evening systematically destroying two lives. The locksmith would arrive at 9, giving me enough time to execute the next phase of my plan before Stephanie and Ryan figured out what was happening. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Ryan and 3 voicemails that I had no intention of listening to. There were also 2 texts from numbers I didn't recognize, which likely meant Stephanie had gotten my information from Ryan and was trying to reach me directly. I turned the phone to silent mode and focused on the task at hand. The locksmith arrived precisely on time, a weathered man in his 50s, who'd clearly seen enough domestic drama to avoid asking unnecessary questions. I explained that I needed the locks changed because my roommate had moved out unexpectedly and failed to return her key. He nodded with the practiced indifference of someone who understood that half his calls involved relationship complications. "Standard deadbolt and door handle?" he asked, examining the existing hardware. "Actually, let's upgrade to something more secure. The building has had some break-in attempts recently." The lie came surprisingly easily, another small sign of how thoroughly this situation had changed me. Something that requires a keycard might be overkill, but definitely something that can't be picked or bumped. He recommended a high-security lock system that would cost triple the standard price, but money wasn't really a consideration when I was using Stephanie's emergency credit card to pay for it. If she wanted to play games with other people's homes, she could fund the security improvements to her own. While he worked, I continued my methodical exploration of Stephanie's life. Her home office revealed the most interesting discoveries, particularly a filing system that contained detailed information about several married men she'd apparently been targeting simultaneously. Ryan wasn't her only project. He was just the one who'd proven most susceptible to her particular brand of manipulation. The files were organized with the efficiency of someone running a business, complete with financial assessments, relationship status reports, and strategic notes about each target's vulnerability. One folder contained information about a pharmaceutical executive in Phoenix, whose wife was battling cancer. Another detailed the marriage troubles of a tech entrepreneur in San Francisco, who was going through a midlife crisis. Stephanie Morgan wasn't just a homewrecker, she was a professional predator, who'd turned destroying marriages into a calculated income stream. The most disturbing file was labeled Austin Project and contained everything she'd gathered about Ryan and me over the past 6 months. Photos of our house, copies of property records, information about Ryan's salary and our mortgage payments, even details about my work schedule and travel patterns. She'd been conducting surveillance on us like we were subjects in an experiment rather than real people with real lives. Her notes revealed the depth of her planning. She'd identified me as the weak link who could be easily displaced once Ryan's dissatisfaction reached critical mass. Her strategy involved gradually undermining his respect for me, while positioning herself as the superior alternative in every category that mattered to his ego: professional success, physical attractiveness, social connections, lifestyle ambitions. She'd crafted herself to be everything she calculated I wasn't. What made it worse was how well her plan had worked. Reading Ryan's responses to her carefully orchestrated seduction was like watching someone I'd loved for 8 years transform into a stranger. She'd fed his insecurities and inflated his ego until he genuinely believed he deserved better than what he had. The psychological manipulation was so subtle and systematic that I almost admired her skill even as I despised her for using it. The locksmith finished his work and handed me 2 sets of keys along with the electronic fob that operated the new security system. Should take about 10 minutes for the old keys to stop working, he explained. Anyone trying to use them after that will trigger the alarm system. Perfect timing since my phone was lighting up with increasingly frantic calls from both Ryan and the mystery number. I waited exactly 11 minutes, then sent a group text to all the numbers that had been trying to reach me. Locks have been changed. Property has been secured. Any attempts at unauthorized entry will result in criminal charges. The responses were immediate and explosive. Ryan called within 30 seconds, his voice tight with panic when I finally answered. "Victoria, what the hell are you doing? You can't just change someone else's locks. That's breaking and entering. Destruction of property, I don't know what else." Interesting perspective from someone whose girlfriend has been squatting in my house for weeks, I replied calmly. "Did you get her belongings packed up like I asked?" "She's not there. She flew back to Denver this morning when I told her what happened. But Victoria, this has gone too far. You're going to get yourself arrested. Only if someone files a complaint. And since Stephanie would have to explain why she had keys to my house in the first place, I doubt she'll be involving law enforcement anytime soon. What do you want? Money? An apology? Just tell me what it will take to end this." The desperation in his voice was almost satisfying, but what struck me more was how quickly he'd moved to negotiation mode. No real remorse for what he'd done, no acknowledgement of how his choices had created this situation, just immediate focus on damage control and getting back to his comfortable lies. "I want you to understand that actions have consequences, Ryan. For 8 years I've been the understanding wife who didn't make waves when you disappointed me. I've been the supportive partner who put your needs ahead of my own wants. I've been the convenient background character in your life story while you figured out what you really want. That's not fair. You make it sound like I never cared about you. Maybe you did care, in your own way. But you cared more about yourself. You cared more about what Stephanie could do for your ego than what I'd already done for your life. And when you got tired of being married to me, you decided to replace me instead of working on our problems." The line went quiet for so long I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller, less certain than before. "So what happens now? Are we getting divorced?" It was a reasonable question, and one I'd been avoiding thinking about seriously. The legal logistics of ending an 8-year marriage were complicated enough, without adding charges of adultery, home invasion, and financial infidelity to the mix. But the emotional logistics were even more complex. "I don't know," I admitted. "Right now I need time to figure out who I am when I'm not busy being your wife. I need space to remember what I wanted from life, before I started compromising my dreams to support yours. I could end things with Stephanie. We could try counseling. Could you, or would you just get better at hiding it? Because the problem isn't that you had an affair, Ryan. The problem is that you're the kind of person who could plan and execute something this cruel while looking me in the eye every day and pretending to love me. Another long silence. When he spoke again, I could hear something that might have been genuine regret. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you in ways that might be impossible to forgive, but I don't want to lose you completely, Victoria. Even if we can't save our marriage, I don't want you to disappear from my life entirely. Then you should have thought about that before you invited another woman to take my place. I looked around Stephanie's apartment, at the evidence of her systematic destruction of other people's relationships, and made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I'm staying in Denver for a while. There are some things I need to figure out, and I can't do that in Austin, where everything reminds me of the life we built together. How long is a while? As long as it takes. I'm going to find a job here, maybe rent a place of my own. See what it feels like to make decisions based on what I want instead of what we want. Victoria, you can't just abandon your whole life because you're angry. I'm not abandoning anything. I'm choosing something different. For the first time in 8 years, I'm choosing myself. After I hung up, I sat in Stephanie's living room and tried to process what I'd just committed to. Staying in Denver wasn't just an escape from my problems, it was a complete reinvention of my identity. I'd have to find work in a new city, build a social network from scratch, create a life that belonged entirely to me, rather than being half of a couple. The prospect was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I'd spent my entire adult life as Ryan's girlfriend, and then Ryan's wife, defining myself in relation to someone else's needs and goals. The idea of being just Victoria, accountable only to myself, was both liberating and overwhelming. My first practical step was extending my stay at Stephanie's apartment. Since she'd obviously been planning to spend indefinite time in Austin, her lease was paid through the end of the year. The building management company was surprisingly accommodating when I explained that I was taking over the lease due to unexpected circumstances. A few forged signatures on subletting paperwork, backed up by Stephanie's own credit cards for security deposits, and I had legitimate residency for the next 6 months. Next came finding employment. My marketing background was solid, but Denver's job market was competitive, and most companies weren't interested in remote workers from other states. I spent the weekend crafting a new resume that emphasized my independent project management skills rather than my team collaboration experience. If I was going to reinvent myself, I might as well aim for something more ambitious than what I'd been doing in Austin. By Monday morning, I had 3 phone interviews scheduled and a growing sense that this spontaneous decision might actually work. Denver was a city built on reinvention, full of people who'd come there to escape their past and build something new. I wouldn't be the first woman to start over after a marriage imploded, and I certainly wouldn't be the last. The first interview was with a sustainable technology startup that needed someone to manage their product launch campaigns. The company was exactly the kind of place I'd always wanted to work, but never applied to because Ryan thought startups were too risky for someone with a mortgage and responsibility. The irony wasn't lost on me that his betrayal had freed me to pursue opportunities I'd been too cautious to consider while we were together. Marcus Rivera, the company's co-founder, conducted the interview from their office in the Reno district, a converted warehouse space that buzzed with creative energy. He was younger than me by several years, with the kind of passionate intensity that comes from building something meaningful, rather than just chasing profit margins. "Your experience is impressive," he said, reviewing my portfolio on his laptop. "But most of our team has startup background. Corporate marketing can be pretty different from what we do here. Are you sure you're ready for that transition?" "I'm ready for a lot of transitions," I replied honestly. "I'm at a point in my life where playing it safe hasn't been working out for me. I'd rather take risks on something I believe in than coast along in a comfortable situation that isn't actually making me happy." He looked up from the screen, studying my face with the kind of attention that suggested he was seeing something beyond my professional qualification. "That's refreshingly honest. Most people give me rehearsed answers about seeking new challenges and professional growth. I could give you those answers too, but the truth is simpler. I'm starting over in a lot of ways, and I want my work to be part of building something better, rather than just maintaining something acceptable." The conversation shifted from formal interview questions to genuine discussion about the company's mission, their approach to sustainable technology, and the kind of marketing strategies that would resonate with environmentally conscious consumers. Marcus had the rare ability to make complex technical concepts accessible without being condescending, and I found myself genuinely excited about the prospect of working with him. "We can't offer the salary you were making in Austin," he admitted, as the interview wound down. "Startup budgets are pretty tight, especially in the early stages. But we do offer equity participation and a lot of autonomy in how you structure your campaigns. Honestly, the money isn't my primary concern right now. I'm more interested in the opportunity to build something meaningful from the ground up. In that case, I'd like to offer you the position. When can you start?" The speed of the decision caught me off guard, but I wasn't about to question good fortune when it appeared. "How about next Monday? That gives me time to handle some personal logistics." We shook hands, and I walked out of the building with my first job offer in 8 years that had nothing to do with Ryan's opinions or our shared financial obligation. The salary was indeed lower than what I'd been making, but Marcus was right about the equity potential. If the company succeeded, I could end up making more than I'd ever dreamed possible in corporate marketing. More importantly, I'd found work that aligned with my values rather than just paying the bill. The company's focus on environmental sustainability and social responsibility felt like a chance to contribute to something larger than myself, something that would matter regardless of what happened with my personal life. That evening, I called my best friend Claire in Austin to update her on my rapid life changes. Claire Thompson had been my voice of reason through every major decision of my adult life, including my marriage to Ryan, and I needed her perspective on what I was doing. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said after I'd explained the situation. "You found out Ryan was cheating, discovered his girlfriend was living in your house, flew to Denver, changed the locks on her apartment, and now you've decided to move there permanently and start working for a company you'd never heard of a week ago." That's a fairly accurate summary. "Yeah, Victoria, I'm not saying you're wrong to be angry. What Ryan did was unforgivable. But don't you think you might be making some pretty major life decisions while you're still in crisis mode?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since accepting Marcus's job offer. Was I running away from my problems, or running towards solutions? Was this brave reinvention, or elaborate avoidance? "Maybe I am making decisions too quickly," I admitted. "But Claire, I've spent 8 years making careful, responsible decisions that prioritized stability over everything else. I stayed in a safe job because Ryan thought entrepreneurship was too risky. I avoided travel opportunities because he needed consistency in his schedule. I put off having children because he wanted to be more financially secure first. Those weren't unreasonable concerns. No, they weren't, but they were his concerns, not mine. And look where all that careful planning got me. A cheating husband and a life that I'd shaped around someone else's priorities." Claire was quiet for a moment, probably recognizing the truth in what I was saying, even if she worried about my method. "So what's the plan? You're going to live in this woman's apartment indefinitely and build a new career in Denver." "The apartment situation is temporary. I'm looking at places of my own, something small but comfortable. And yes, I'm going to build a career here. For the first time in my adult life, I'm going to make decisions based on what I want, rather than what's practical or safe or acceptable to someone else." "And what about Ryan? Are you filing for divorce?" That was the question I'd been avoiding, partly because the legal complications felt overwhelming and partly because making it official would mean accepting that 8 years of my life had been wasted on someone who'd never really valued what we had together. "I don't know. Right now I'm focused on building something new rather than tearing down something old. The divorce conversation can wait until I figure out who I am when I'm not defined by my relationship status. Just promise me you'll be careful, Claire. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but don't let that anger make you reckless with your future. I promise." "But Claire, I also need you to understand that careful hasn't been working for me. Maybe it's time to try something different." After we hung up, I sat on Stephanie's couch and thought about what Claire had said. Was I being reckless? Probably. Was I making decisions too quickly? Almost certain. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving towards something I actually wanted, rather than just accepting what I thought I deserved. The next morning, I started apartment hunting in earnest. Denver's rental market was competitive, but I had advantages that most applicants lacked: excellent credit, stable employment starting Monday, and the financial flexibility that came from having access to credit cards that weren't technically mine. I found a perfect one-bedroom loft in the Highland neighborhood, close enough to walk to work but far enough from downtown to feel residential. The space was small but beautifully designed, with exposed brick walls and huge windows that flooded the room with natural light. Most importantly, it felt like a fresh start rather than a compromise. The landlord, Diana Foster, was a woman in her 40s who'd clearly built her real estate business on reading people accurately. She asked thoughtful questions about my work situation and my reasons for moving to Denver, listening to my carefully edited explanation with the kind of attention that suggested she understood there was more to the story. "You know," she said as we finished the paperwork, "I see a lot of people starting over in this city. Some are running away from problems, and some are running toward opportunities. The successful ones are usually the latter. Which one do you think I am? Based on how you've handled this process, I'd say you're someone who's done being passive about your own life. That's usually a good sign." She was right, though she probably didn't realize how accurately she'd read the situation. For 8 years, I'd been reactive rather than proactive, responding to Ryan's needs and adjustments rather than setting my own direction. Moving to Denver, taking the job with Marcus's company, even changing Stephanie's locks, these were the first truly autonomous decisions I'd made since college. As I signed the lease agreement, I felt something shift inside me, a sense of ownership over my choices that I hadn't experienced in years. This apartment would be mine, furnished with things I chose, decorated according to my taste, filled with the life I built rather than the life I'd inherited through marriage. That weekend, I went furniture shopping with the kind of enthusiasm I hadn't felt since I was 22 and setting up my first apartment after graduation. Everything I chose was deliberate, selected because I loved it rather than because it matched existing pieces or fit someone else's aesthetic preferences. For the first time in almost a decade, I was building something that belonged entirely to me. And while the circumstances that had led to this freedom were painful and complicated, the freedom itself was intoxicating. By Sunday evening, I had the keys to my new apartment, a starting date for my new job, and the beginning of what felt like a completely new identity. Victoria Hayes, the accommodating wife who'd lost herself in someone else's priorities, was being replaced by someone stronger, more independent, and infinitely more interesting. I still didn't know whether Ryan and I would eventually divorce, or if there was any possibility of rebuilding what we'd had, but for the first time since I'd discovered his betrayal, that uncertainty didn't terrify me. Whatever happened with my marriage, I was finally building a life that could stand on its own, and that felt like the most important victory of all. Working for Marcus Rivera's company turned out to be everything I'd hoped for, and nothing like what I'd expected. Sustainable Solutions operated out of a converted warehouse in the River North Art District, where the walls were covered with prototypes of solar-powered water purification systems, and the conference rooms were named after renewable energy pioneers. The environment was chaotic in the best possible way, filled with engineers who got genuinely excited about reducing carbon footprints and marketing challenges that actually matter. My first week involved learning a completely new vocabulary of environmental impact assessments and sustainability metrics, but Marcus was patient with my transition from corporate speak to startup innovation. He had a gift for explaining complex concepts without making me feel stupid for asking questions, and I found myself staying late not because I had to, but because I was genuinely fascinated by what we were building. The company's flagship product was a water filtration system designed for communities without reliable access to clean drinking water. Traditional marketing would have focused on technical specifications and cost comparisons, but Marcus wanted something different. He wanted campaigns that told stories about real people whose lives would be changed by having access to clean water for the first time. "Numbers don't make people care," he explained during my second week as we reviewed preliminary campaign concepts, "but stories do. If we can help people understand the human impact of what we're doing, the business case becomes secondary." It was exactly the kind of meaningful work I'd always imagined doing but never thought was practical. In Austin, I'd spent years creating campaigns for products I didn't believe in, services that existed primarily to generate profit rather than solve problems. Here, every project felt like it could actually make the world slightly better, and that sense of purpose was addictive. My colleagues were an interesting mix of idealistic engineers and pragmatic business professionals, most of whom had left more lucrative positions to work on something they believed mattered. There was Sarah Chen, a former pharmaceutical researcher who'd gotten tired of developing treatments for diseases that only affected wealthy populations. David Park had walked away from a six-figure tech job to focus on environmental solutions that could be implemented in developing countries. What struck me most was how supportive everyone was of each other's personal growth alongside professional development. When I mentioned that I was going through a difficult separation and learning to rebuild my life from scratch, the response wasn't awkward sympathy, but genuine encouragement and practical advice. The best thing about starting over, Sarah told me during a coffee break, is that you get to choose who you become instead of just accepting who you've always been. I was miserable for years before I finally admitted that money wasn't worth hating my work. It was the kind of wisdom that only comes from people who've made similar leaps of faith, and I found myself gravitating toward colleagues who understood that professional reinvention often goes hand in hand with personal transformation. Marcus turned out to be more than just an inspiring boss. He became a mentor who challenged me to think bigger about what I could accomplish. When I suggested a modest digital marketing campaign for our water filtration launch, he pushed me to consider multimedia storytelling that would include documentary-style videos and community partnerships. "You have instincts for this kind of work," he said after I'd presented a comprehensive campaign strategy that went far beyond anything I'd ever attempted. "Don't limit yourself to what you think is safe or conventional. The best marketing tells truths that people need to hear." By my third month, I was leading campaigns that were getting attention from industry publications and environmental advocacy groups. The work was challenging in ways that corporate marketing had never been, requiring me to understand not just consumer psychology, but also social impact assessment and sustainable business practices. More importantly, I was discovering capabilities I'd never known I possessed. The Victoria who'd been Ryan's accommodating wife would never have had the confidence to propose a partnership with National Geographic for documentary coverage of our water project. But this new version of myself, freed from the need to seek approval for every decision, was willing to reach out to contacts I'd never have approached before. The partnership materialized after a series of phone calls and presentations that would have terrified me 6 months earlier. National Geographic was launching a series on innovative solutions to global water scarcity, and our filtration systems fit perfectly with their editorial goals. The collaboration would provide them with compelling content, while giving us exposure to audiences we could never have reached independently. When the contract was finalized, Marcus took me out to celebrate at a small restaurant in the Highlands that specialized in farm-to-table cuisine. It was the kind of place where the servers could tell you exactly which farm had grown your vegetables and how the chef had prepared each dish to minimize environmental impact. "I have a confession," he said as we shared a dessert made with honey from the restaurant's own rooftop beehive. "When I hired you, I thought you had good potential but would need time to adjust to our way of doing things. I never expected you to transform our entire approach to stakeholder engagement in 3 months." The compliment was unexpected and more meaningful than he probably realized. For 8 years, Ryan had treated my professional accomplishments as secondary to his own career advancement. Even when I'd exceeded my sales targets or earned recognition from clients, he'd always found ways to diminish my achievements or redirect conversations toward his own success. I think I needed to be in an environment where taking risks was encouraged rather than discouraged, I replied honestly. My ex-husband preferred safety and predictability in all things. It took me a while to remember that I used to be someone who enjoyed challenge. Marcus studied my face with the kind of attention that made me suddenly aware of how much I'd changed since arriving in Denver. The nervous, betrayed woman who'd fled Austin was being replaced by someone more confident, more willing to advocate for her own ideas and trust her own judgment. "Can I ask what happened with your marriage? You don't have to answer if it's too personal." The question was fair, especially since my divorce proceedings had officially begun the previous month. Ryan had finally accepted that I wasn't coming back to Austin, and we'd both hired attorneys to navigate the dissolution of 8 years of shared assets and obligations. He had an affair with someone who convinced him I was holding him back from achieving his full potential, I said simply. Turned out she was right about him needing to make changes, just wrong about what those changes should be. His loss, Marcus said with quiet conviction, though I suppose his mistake is Denver's game. There was something in his tone that suggested the conversation was moving beyond professional mentorship, and I felt a flutter of attraction that surprised me with its intensity. Marcus was everything Ryan wasn't. Passionate about his work, genuinely interested in making the world better, and comfortable with strong women who had their own ambitions. Are you always this direct with your employees? I asked, testing whether I was reading the situation correctly. Only with the ones who've revolutionized our marketing strategy and happen to be brilliant, beautiful, and recently single, he replied with a smile that made my pulse quicken. The flirtation was gentle and respectful, nothing like the aggressive pursuit I'd experienced from other men who'd learned about my separation. Marcus seemed content to let attraction develop naturally rather than pressuring me for immediate decisions about where things might lead. We walked back to my apartment together, talking about everything except the obvious chemistry building between us. When we reached my building, he kissed my cheek goodnight with the kind of restraint that suggested he was willing to wait until I was ready for more. Thank you for dinner, I said, surprised by how much I wanted to invite him upstairs. Thank you for being exactly the person this company needed, he replied, and for being exactly the person I didn't know I was hoping to meet. That night I lay in bed thinking about how dramatically my life had changed in just 4 months. The woman who'd been devastated by Ryan's betrayal was being replaced by someone who could attract a man like Marcus Rivera, someone who saw strength and intelligence as attractive qualities rather than threats to his own ego. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. How's the new life treating you? Ryan's been asking about you. I typed back, new life is amazing. Tell Ryan I'm too busy building something better to look backward. It was true. The divorce proceedings were moving forward smoothly, with Ryan agreeing to most of my requests in what seemed like an attempt to assuage his guilt. He'd offered me half of everything, including the house, but I'd surprised him by asking only for my personal belongings and enough cash to start fresh. You can keep the house, I'd told my attorney. It was never really mine anyway. Every decision about that place was made to accommodate his preferences. I'd rather build something new than try to reclaim something that was never authentic to who I am. The decision had confused Ryan, who'd expected me to fight for assets and try to punish him financially. But I'd discovered that revenge was less satisfying than success, and I was more interested in moving forward than settling scores. By my 6th month at Sustainable Solutions, I'd been promoted to Director of Strategic Communications, with a salary that exceeded what I'd been making in Austin. More importantly, I was doing work that felt meaningful and aligned with values I'd forgotten I possessed during my years of corporate compromise. The National Geographic partnership had led to other media collaborations, and our water filtration project was getting attention from international development organizations. I'd built relationships with journalists, nonprofit leaders, and policymakers who were genuinely interested in the solutions we were developing. Marcus and I had begun dating officially after the company Christmas party, where he'd finally worked up the courage to ask me out properly instead of limiting our interactions to professional dinners and casual coffee meetings. The relationship was different from anything I'd experienced with Ryan, built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than convenience and habit. You know what I love about you? Marcus said one evening as we cooked dinner together in my apartment. You're not trying to be someone you think I want you to be. You're just authentically yourself, and that's incredibly attractive. It was exactly what I'd needed to hear, validation that the person I was becoming was someone worth knowing and loving. With Ryan, I'd spent years modifying my behavior and suppressing aspects of my personality that didn't fit his vision of an ideal wife. With Marcus, I felt free to be ambitious, opinionated, and passionate about my work without worrying that success would threaten his ego. Our relationship developed alongside my professional growth, each success reinforcing the other in ways that felt sustainable and healthy. When I was invited to speak at a conference on environmental marketing strategies, Marcus encouraged me to accept even though it meant traveling to San Francisco for a week. When I expressed interest in pursuing a graduate certificate in sustainability studies, He offered to adjust my work schedule to accommodate classes. "I want you to become everything you're capable of being," he told me when I worried that additional education might interfere with my job responsibilities. "This company will be stronger if you're stronger, and I'll be a better partner if you're fulfilled in all aspects of your life." It was the kind of support I'd never experienced from Ryan, who'd always seen my achievements as potential threats to his position as the primary breadwinner and decision-maker in our relationship. Marcus treated my success as something to celebrate rather than manage, and that freedom was intoxicating. The first semester of graduate classes was challenging but exhilarating, forcing me to think systematically about environmental policy, social responsibility, and the intersection of business practices with ecological sustainability. My classmates were a diverse group of professionals from various industries, all seeking to integrate environmental consciousness into their career. During group projects and class discussions, I found myself naturally taking leadership roles and contributing insights that drew on my practical experience with sustainability marketing. Professors praised my ability to bridge theoretical concepts with real-world applications, and several classmates asked for advice on their own career transitions. "You should consider teaching," suggested Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who led the program. "You have a gift for making complex concepts accessible, and your industry experience would be valuable for students trying to understand how environmental theory translates to practical business applications." The suggestion planted a seed that began growing throughout my second semester. Teaching had always been something I'd thought about, but never seriously pursued. Partly because Ryan had dismissed academia as impractical and poorly compensated, but the idea of sharing knowledge and helping other professionals navigate career transitions similar to my own was genuinely appealing. Marcus was enthusiastic when I mentioned the possibility of eventually teaching part-time while continuing my work at Sustainable Solutions. "You could develop curriculum that bridges what you're learning in school with what you're implementing here," he said. "Students would benefit from learning sustainability marketing from someone who's actually doing it successfully." By the end of my first year in Denver, I'd completed half of my graduate certificate, been promoted again at work, and established myself as someone whose opinions mattered in the local environmental community. I was invited to serve on the board of a nonprofit focused on water access issues, asked to advise other startups on sustainable marketing strategies, and regularly quoted in industry publications. More importantly, I'd built a life that felt entirely my own. My apartment had become a space that reflected my actual tastes rather than compromise positions with a partner. My social circle consisted of people who shared my interests and values, rather than couples connected through Ryan's work relationship. My career was focused on making positive change, rather than just advancing up corporate hierarchies. The woman who'd been devastated by her husband's betrayal, 18 months earlier, had been replaced by someone stronger, more confident, and infinitely more interesting. I still felt sadness when I thought about the failure of my marriage, but it was overshadowed by excitement about everything I was building in its place. When Claire visited Denver for the first time, she was amazed by the transformation. "You seem like a completely different person," she said as I gave her a tour of my neighborhood and introduced her to my colleagues at a company happy hour. "Not just happier, but more yourself, if that makes sense." It made perfect sense. For the first time in my adult life, I was living authentically according to my own values and priorities, rather than molding myself to fit someone else's expectation. The freedom was intoxicating, and the success that came from that authenticity felt sustainable in ways that my previous achievements never had. I think I needed to lose everything I thought I wanted in order to discover what I actually needed. I told Claire as we walked through the art district where Marcus and I had been looking at gallery spaces for a potential sustainability-focused exhibition. "So no regrets about leaving Austin, about the divorce?" "None at all. Ryan did me a favor by showing me who he really was, before I wasted any more years on a relationship that was fundamentally incompatible with who I'm becoming." That night, Marcus and I attended a fundraising gala for environmental nonprofits, where I was being recognized for my work on the National Geographic collaboration. As I stood at the podium accepting an award for innovative environmental communications, I looked out at an audience of accomplished professionals who respected my work and contribution. The irony wasn't lost on me that 18 months earlier, I'd been heartbroken because one person had decided I wasn't worth keeping. Now I was surrounded by people who valued my insights, supported my ambitions, and celebrated my successes without feeling threatened by them. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't making Ryan and Stephanie pay for what they'd done to me. The best revenge was building a life so fulfilling that their betrayal became irrelevant, a painful but ultimately beneficial push toward everything I was meant to become. As Marcus and I danced at the gala after-party, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The woman who'd been replaced by a younger, more ambitious model had become someone even better, a person who didn't need anyone else's validation to know her own worth. And that transformation was just the beginning of what felt like an unlimited future. 2 years after I'd walked away from my old life, fate decided to arrange the most poetic reunion imaginable. Marcus had been invited to present our water filtration technology at a national environmental summit in Austin, and he'd asked me to accompany him as co-presenter. The irony of returning to my former city as a successful environmental entrepreneur wasn't lost on either of us. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Marcus asked as our plane descended toward Austin Bergstrom International Airport. "It's going to be strange being back there, especially if you run into people from your old life." I looked down at the familiar sprawl of Texas hill country and felt surprisingly calm. The woman who'd fled this city, in devastation and rage, had been replaced by someone who could return as an invited expert, someone whose professional accomplishments stood on their own merit, regardless of what had happened in her personal life. "I'm ready," I said, meaning it completely. "Whatever happens, I'm not the same person who left here. I'm curious to see how that feels." The conference was being held at the Austin Convention Center, and our presentation was scheduled for the second day. We checked into the Fairmont, a luxury hotel that would have been far beyond my budget during my marriage, but was now standard accommodation for speaking engagements. The upgrade felt symbolic of how thoroughly my circumstances had changed. That evening, we attended the welcome reception, where I found myself networking with environmental policy experts, clean technology investors, and sustainability consultants from across the country. These were my professional peers now, people who knew me as Victoria Hayes, Director of Strategic Communications for one of the most innovative water technology companies in the Southwest. I was deep in conversation with a potential client from California when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Victoria? Victoria Hayes?" I turned around to find Jennifer Walsh, a former colleague from my old marketing job. Her expression was a mixture of surprise and curiosity as she took in my transformed appearance. Gone were the conservative business suits and carefully neutral styling I'd worn as Ryan's wife. Tonight I was wearing an elegant emerald dress that complemented my shorter haircut and confident posture. "Jennifer, how wonderful to see you," I said, genuinely pleased to reconnect with someone who'd been a friend during my corporate days. "What brings you to an environmental conference?" "My company's exploring sustainability initiatives, so they sent me to scout potential partnerships." "But what about you? Last I heard you'd moved away after your divorce. I had no idea you were working in environmental technology now." The conversation drew attention from others nearby, including Marcus, who approached with the kind of supportive presence that told me he was ready to handle any awkwardness that might arise from my past connection. "Jennifer, I'd like you to meet Marcus Rivera, my business partner and co-founder of Sustainable Solutions," I said, enjoying the way Jennifer's eyes widened at the word co-founder. "Marcus, Jennifer and I worked together at Davidson Marketing before I made my career transition." "Victoria's being modest," Marcus said, shaking Jennifer's hand warmly. "She's revolutionized how we approach environmental communications. The National Geographic partnership she developed has become a model for other companies in our sector." I watched Jennifer process this information, clearly trying to reconcile the confident professional in front of her with the accommodating wife she'd known during office happy hours and company picnics. Back then, I'd been Ryan's wife who works in marketing, always identified in relation to my husband's more prominent position. "That's incredible," Jennifer said. "I always thought you had more potential than you were using at Davidson. It's amazing to see you in this environment." We chatted for a few more minutes about my work and her company's sustainability goals before she excused herself to network with other potential partners. As she walked away, I caught her glancing back at me with an expression that suggested she was eager to share this unexpected encounter with mutual acquaintances. She seemed surprised by your transformation, Marcus observed with amusement. I think everyone from my old life would be surprised. I'm not sure I would have recognized myself 2 years ago. The next morning, we delivered our presentation to a packed auditorium. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with audience members praising our innovative approach to community engagement and sustainable technology implementation. Several potential clients approached us afterward, interested in adapting our model for their own water access projects. I was collecting business cards and scheduling follow-up meetings when I noticed a familiar figure standing near the back of the auditorium. Ryan was there, wearing the same type of expensive suit he'd always favored, but looking somehow diminished in the context of this impressive gathering. He was accompanied by a woman I didn't recognize, someone whose nervous energy and desperate attempt to appear sophisticated suggested she might be his latest romantic interest. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw him whisper something to his companion before making his way through the crowd toward me. Marcus noticed my change in attention and moved closer, ready to provide support if needed. Victoria, Ryan said when he reached us, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and uncertainty. I saw your name on the speaker list and couldn't believe it. You were incredible up there. Thank you, I replied calmly, noting how different he looked from the confident man who'd once dominated our relationship dynamic. Success in environmental technology apparently carried more social cachet than regional sales management, and Ryan seemed to recognize the shift in our relative positions. This is my friend Amanda, he said, gesturing to the blonde woman beside him who was clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Amanda, this is my ex-wife Victoria, the one I told you about. I wondered what exactly he'd told her about me, but Amanda's expression suggested it hadn't included mentions of professional success or national speaking engagement. She looked like she'd been expecting to meet someone pitiable rather than accomplished. Nice to meet you, I said pleasantly, then turned back to Ryan. What brings you to an environmental conference? I didn't know sustainability had become one of your interests. Amanda works in corporate communications for a renewable energy company, he explained, though his answer didn't really address my question. She thought it would be good for me to understand more about environmental business trends. Marcus stepped forward and introduced himself with the kind of assured confidence that made it clear he was accustomed to being taken seriously in professional settings. Ryan's handshake was firm, but his demeanor suggested he was struggling to process the dynamic between Marcus and me. So you two work together? Ryan asked, though his tone implied he suspected the relationship was more complex than professional collaboration. We're business partners, Marcus replied smoothly. Victoria co-founded our strategic communications division and has been instrumental in our company's growth over the past 2 years. I watched Ryan's face as he absorbed this information. The woman he'd discarded for being insufficiently ambitious had become a co-founder of a successful technology company. The wife he'd replaced with someone stronger and better was now being described as instrumental to a business that was attracting national attention. That's wonderful, he said, though his expression suggested the news was anything but wonderful from his perspective. I always knew you had potential. I'm glad you found the right opportunity to develop it. The condescending tone was subtle but unmistakable, the same patronizing attitude that had characterized his behavior throughout our marriage. But this time, instead of making me feel diminished, it simply confirmed how thoroughly I'd outgrown the relationship that had once defined my identity. I found more than opportunity, I replied. I found clarity about what I actually wanted from life and work. Sometimes you need to lose what you think you want in order to discover what you actually need. Ryan's companion shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. Marcus, meanwhile, was watching the interaction with the kind of analytical attention that suggested he was forming opinions about my ex-husband's character. Well, I should let you get back to your networking, Ryan said, apparently recognizing that prolonging the conversation would only highlight how differently our lives had evolved. It was great to see you doing so well. As they walked away, I heard Amanda asking Ryan questions in a voice that carried across the noise of the reception. She's your ex-wife, the one who left you? But she's so successful and confident. You said she... Her voice faded as they moved toward the exit, but the fragment I'd caught was revealing. Ryan had apparently described me to his new girlfriend in terms that bore no resemblance to the accomplished professional he'd just encountered. The narrative he'd constructed to justify his behavior was being challenged by the reality of who I'd become. Interesting reunion, Marcus commented with dry humor. He doesn't seem like someone who'd be attracted to strong, successful women. He wasn't, I replied. That's why our marriage ended. He needed someone who would make him feel important, rather than someone who might eventually overshadow him. His loss, Marcus said, echoing the words he'd spoken during our first dinner together. Though I have to admit, I'm grateful for his poor judgment. That evening we attended the conference closing gala, where I was surprised to be approached by Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the keynote speaker who delivered an inspiring presentation about women in environmental leadership. She was a legend in the sustainability field, someone whose work had influenced policy at the international level. I wanted to tell you how impressed I was with your presentation, she said. Your approach to community engagement is exactly what this field needs more of. Have you considered expanding your model internationally? The conversation that followed led to an invitation to collaborate on a project with the United Nations Environmental Program, an opportunity that would have been unimaginable during my corporate marketing day. As we discussed potential partnerships and implementation strategies, I realized that my professional reputation now extended far beyond anything I could have achieved while limiting myself to safe, conventional choices. Marcus and I were walking back to our hotel when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw you at the conference today, would love to buy you coffee and catch up if you have time tomorrow. Stephanie. The message was jarring, partly because I'd forgotten that Austin was still Stephanie Morgan's territory, and partly because the casual tone suggested she thought we could interact like normal acquaintances, rather than women whose lives had been entangled through betrayal and revenge. Everything okay? Marcus asked, noticing my expression. I showed him the message, watching as he processed the implications. The other woman, I explained. I guess she heard about my presentation and wants to meet. Are you going to respond? I considered the question seriously. 2 years ago, encountering Stephanie would have triggered rage, hurt, and a desire for confrontation. Now, I felt primarily curiosity about what she wanted, and confidence that whatever game she might be playing, I was no longer vulnerable to her manipulations. Yes, I decided. I think I am. We met the next morning at a coffee shop in South Austin, a trendy spot that seemed designed for difficult conversation. Stephanie arrived looking exactly as polished as her professional photos had suggested, but there was something brittle in her confidence that hadn't been apparent in her social media presence. Victoria, thank you for meeting me, she said, settling into the chair across from me with carefully practiced casualness. I have to say, I was shocked to see you presenting at the conference. Ryan never mentioned that you'd gone into environmental work. I'm sure there are a lot of things Ryan never mentioned, I replied evenly. But then, keeping information compartmentalized seems to be a specialty of his. Stephanie's smile faltered slightly at the reference to his deceptive behavior. I suppose we both learned that about him, didn't we? The admission was unexpected, suggesting that whatever relationship she'd built with Ryan hadn't survived the transition from exciting affair to mundane reality. I found myself genuinely curious about what had happened after I'd left Austin. Are you and Ryan still together? I asked direct. No, we ended things about a year ago, she said, her composed facade slipping enough to reveal genuine regret. Turns out that men who cheat on their wives aren't necessarily more faithful to their mistresses. The irony was so perfect, it was almost funny. Stephanie had destroyed my marriage to acquire a man who'd then treated her exactly as he'd treated me, with casual dishonesty and eventual replacement when someone more appealing came along. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Betrayal is painful regardless of the circumstance. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you, Stephanie continued, her professional mask dropping entirely. I owe you an apology. What I did was inexcusable, and I've spent the last year realizing how much damage I caused to your life. The apology was unexpected and seemed genuine, but I found that I no longer needed it. The woman sitting across from me looked tired and defeated, nothing like the confident predator who'd systematically dismantled my marriage. Whatever satisfaction I might have found in her regret was overshadowed by gratitude for the journey her actions had inadvertently launched. I appreciate you saying that, I told her, but honestly I'm not sure I need an apology anymore. What you and Ryan did was terrible at the time, but it pushed me toward a life that's infinitely better than what I had before. Stephanie looked confused by my response, clearly expecting either anger or gracious forgiveness rather than indifference. But I destroyed your marriage. I turned your life upside down. You revealed the truth about my marriage, I corrected. Ryan's willingness to replace me so easily showed me that what we had wasn't worth saving, and being forced to start over led me to discover capabilities I never would have developed while I was busy being accommodating and safe. You really don't hate me? The question was plaintive, almost childlike, and I realized that Stephanie had been carrying guilt about our situation in ways that I'd moved beyond entirely. Her identity was still tied to the drama she'd created, while mine had evolved to encompass so much more. I don't think about you enough to hate you, I said honestly. You were a catalyst for changes I needed to make, but was too comfortable to pursue on my own. In a strange way, I'm grateful. We finished our coffee with minimal conversation, both recognizing that we had nothing more to say to each other. As I walked back to meet Marcus at our hotel, I felt the satisfying sense of closure that comes from realizing you've completely outgrown a situation that once seemed insurmountable. The flight back to Denver gave me time to reflect on how different this return to Austin had been from what I'd expected. Instead of painful reminders of failure and betrayal, I'd found confirmation of how thoroughly I'd rebuilt my identity around values and relationships that actually matter. Any regrets about seeing them again? Marcus asked as we watched the Texas landscape disappear beneath us. None at all, I replied. It was helpful to remember how far I've come. The woman who was devastated by Ryan's betrayal couldn't have imagined becoming someone who gets invited to speak at international conferences or collaborate with the UN. And the woman who gets to kiss me whenever she wants, Marcus added with a grin that made my heart skip. That's definitely my favorite part of the transformation, I agreed, leaning over to demonstrate his point. 6 months later, Marcus and I were engaged, planning a wedding that would reflect our shared values and commitment to building something meaningful together. The ceremony would be small and intimate, focused on the people who'd supported our individual growth and celebrated our partnership. A year after that, our company was acquired by a major environmental consulting firm that wanted to expand into community-based sustainability projects. The acquisition made us both financially secure while allowing us to continue the work we loved on a larger scale. I did eventually return to Austin one more time, for Claire's wedding, where I served as maid of honor and gave a toast about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who encourage your growth rather than limit your possibilities. Several guests mentioned that they'd heard about my success through mutual friends, and I enjoyed their obvious surprise at how dramatically my life had changed. Ryan was notably absent from the celebration, though Claire mentioned he'd moved to Phoenix with yet another girlfriend, this one a pharmaceutical sales representative, who apparently shared his preference for conventional ambitions and traditional relationship dynamics. I felt no curiosity about his new situation, recognizing that we'd evolved into completely incompatible people who were better off building separate lives. The most satisfying moment came when Claire's mother, who'd always been skeptical of my marriage to Ryan, pulled me aside during the reception. I have to tell you, she said with the frankness that comes with age and wine, I never thought Ryan deserved you. You always seemed like you were holding yourself back to make him comfortable. It's wonderful to see you with someone who appreciates what you bring to the relationship. As Marcus and I danced at the reception, surrounded by friends who knew us as individuals and as partners, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The betrayal that had once seemed like the end of my story had actually been the beginning of a much better one. The woman who'd been replaced by someone stronger and better had become genuinely strong and infinitely better, not because she'd sought revenge against those who'd hurt her, but because she'd chosen to build something authentic rather than trying to repair something that had never been right. That, I realized, was the ultimate victory, not making others pay for their mistakes, but creating a life so fulfilling that their actions became irrelevant footnotes in a story of genuine transformation and lasting happiness. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.